Good morning, Facebook. Here today looking at Psalms chapter 48, looking at verses 12 through 14. And you see in verse 12, you see what the psalmist is doing here. Now he's walking through Jerusalem after this massive battle that should have ended in a defeat. This massive battle that should have overwhelmed the nation of Israel. They were outmanned. They were outstrengthed. The enemy had all the numbers. They had the most updated weapon system. But you see, despite all of that, you see Israel still came out victorious, not in their own strength, not in their own power, but solely because the Spirit of the Lord was among them. Now you see here in verse 12, you see the psalmist, as he's walking through Jerusalem, he's looking and he's reflecting on that very victory. Not only how it was impossible by a human standpoint, but also everything that God has done. Everything that God has done in that battle, how he brought victory when the world, when human knowledge would have said there is no hope, all hope is lost, when it's impossible. But you see, not just that. Also, everything that God has done in that psalmist's life, how God was with him when he was a small child, when God was with him when he was an adolescent, and even when he lived in active rebellion, how the hand of God was still active in his life, how the hand of God was still drawing him in and working in his life to get him where he needs to be, to get him where he is today. And you see in verse 13, as he's walking through Jerusalem and reflecting on the very goodness, grace, and love of God, you see verse 13 goes in much more detail. He's saying how he sees the very hand of God so evident in that city. He sees how God provided. He sees how God protected. And you see in the same way as it was for him, he can see all the many times taking that walk down memory lane, how many times the hand of God has kept him safe, how many times the hand of God has protected him, even when he was in his old mess, when the hand of God pulled him out of that miry clay. Each and every time he'd make that wrong choice, each and every time he'd look to himself when he should have been looking to God. And you see in verse 14, it says the motive. Because everything that God has done, and not just because he's done everything, but because of what he continues to do. The very fact that God's hedge of protection, his hand continues to be on him, that is what motivates him for each and every future choice that he continues to make. But us as Christians today, as we start our day, what is the motive behind the attitudes, behind the words, behind the actions that we show towards others? What is the motive for the very attitude that we start this day with? Is it motivated by a love for ourselves, a love for comfort, or is it motivated for